And then the robots take over with Pluto and Aquarius. Just kidding.
Listen, they kind of are. Have you tried to Google search lately? I was like, I don't want to know what AI thinks. I just want to find the article.
Let me do analog internet.
I'm a millennial. It's like what I need.
Hello and welcome. This is another episode of Down to Astro. I'm Chani Nicholas.
I'm Thea Anderson.
And Eliza Robertson is not with us today, but she will be back for the next episode. We thought we should get this episode done while the events and the astrology are still kind of fresh, and because, you know, it's Mercury retrograde still, and we're moving into eclipse season, so who knows what's going to happen. But this is a show, if you're new to the show, this is an astrology show, obviously. And what we do is we talk about the astrology that just happened and the world events that simultaneously occurred and how we see them having lined up. And then we also talk about what's to come. So, you know, it's been a month of not a lot of news, not a lot has gone on, not a lot is happening. It's pretty dull. It's pretty chill.
Very boring.
Very boring, very boring. Not a lot to talk about. So, you know, I said 7,000 times that the astrology of the RNC, July 15th, and the beginning dates of the RNC and the DNC were horrible, like bad astrology, like I would never do an event. And obviously the RNC was, you know, pretty eventful, not in like fun or nice ways, what happened right before it. But I was stunned at how much enthusiasm occurred under such duress, astrologically speaking. Were you?
I was too. I just thought there would be interfering chaos. And
Yeah.
instead it felt like almost like a moment to make stuff happen that felt really memorable.
Yeah. And I think what I learned so much, so the astrology that we're talking about, there's a couple of different pieces to it. But one of the like, you know, pieces we can pick out is Mars in Gemini making a conjunction with Jupiter in Gemini. And Mars is the planet of heroes and war and conflict and courage and energy and valor and just like, what's the word I'm looking? Controversy, right? Like Mars loves to stir us. And then Gemini loves to just all kinds of verbal chaos and diarrhea and all the things. It's like, you know, just loves to run wild. And so with Mars in that sign, I was like, oh my God, what are the headlines going to be? And what is the like chaos going to be in terms of like what's getting put out there and the misinformation and the disinformation and all that stuff. And then Jupiter is the planet of abundance and wisdom and benevolence and growth and is the great teacher. And so what I thought was going to happen before Biden dropped out, before we knew that Biden was going to drop out, like when I was looking at this last year, I was like, oh my God, like this is just going to be the worst case scenario for all of the headlines to just be absolutely bananas in a way that was really bad for, I don't know, I could say like truth or for facts, I would say. And then like there's a lot of other pieces that squared Saturn, which can be like a really big obstacle. So the week before the DNC happens, Mars and Jupiter come together. And what we know is that as soon as Mars went into Gemini, Biden drops out, full moon happens in Capricorn. Biden drops out, Mars moves into Gemini, Kamala is seemingly going to be the candidate. Biden endorses her. She has Gemini rising. That Mars just goes full steam ahead in her first house. She is talking to everyone. She is everywhere. We talked in the last episode about all the memes. Gemini loves a meme, loves a quip, loves a little soundbite. And Mars and Gemini loves a hot take. So all of a sudden you just see her likeness flourishing and all of these different iterations. And so as Mars and Jupiter come together, even though they're squaring Saturn, she is having like this absolute, what looks like for this moment, triumphant situation. And the, on large part, like in a very surprising way, the masses are stirred towards a really positive type of feeling towards her, towards the party, towards the election, which is just unheard of because she's running against the orange Cheeto Satan, and nobody wants to go through an election with that. And so it was shocking that like it was so good on the way in. And we also talked about how hard her astrology was on the way into the DNC, the week before the DNC, because her Venus was trapped between Mars and Saturn. So just like that little piece of it, Thea, did you like pick up anything, or do you have anything you want to say about like that just moving into, we're not even at the full moon yet. We're just like just about to
Just
be
doing the
there.
Mars, Jupiter.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
really feel like, well, I was reflecting on how that piece that you just said about this is the worst astrology. And I, as an astrologer, Chani was like, okay, so there's the worst astrology that then generates like this incredible amount of like rocket fuel that like this tension, like, because if the square creates tension and friction, it begets energy, this sort of like catalyst to the experiment that is Kamala. And then we get this just like explosion of enthusiasm, revving up, the rah of it all. And I was like, so she's positive. So it's like a positive situation here for someone who I think, because,
Who
as you
no
said,
one
her
had any enthusiasm about a couple of weeks ago.
people were like, I don't really know who she is.
Yeah.
But so yeah, so but I think that the meme of it all, it's like that Gemini. I just like we just got so much information, and maybe the public is like getting a meme. Like this is the way that you invigorate the masses, the electorate. Like that we get we get
What a
memes and we get
nightmare.
colors and we get vibes, and then
Yeah. We
it's a
actually
little
don't get any policy. We don't get any actual
no.
information.
No, that's all missing. But people seem, in absence of that, understand. I think it's the time crunch that,
Yeah.
like, because we only have so much time, we just need to throw everything into it.
But that's interesting because Saturn is time and a Saturn Mars square is a time crunch. But I think
So right.
because the benefics, because Jupiter, and we didn't mention Venus yet, Jupiter and Venus are in this mix. What is traditionally the worst type of thing, a Mars Saturn square opposition conjunction, because the benefics, Jupiter, planet of abundance, and Venus, planet of social cohesion or connection, beauty, are in the mix. It's like it's a bad scenario, but made good because no one wants your presidential candidate, I guess, to drop out right before, the DNC, right before the election without enough time to like vet and put forth the other candidate. But the bad situation has worked out so far really well for her
Hmm.
amidst really challenging astrology. So part of how I wanted to intro this is just like, we were wrong. Like I was wrong with this. Like I thought something awful was going to happen. And then we haven't
I did
even talked
too.
about,
I did too.
yeah. And then we even talked about the full moon that happened. We're kind of getting ahead of ourselves, but I just wanted to like lay out this first piece because this is where we ended last time. The full moon happens on the beginning of the DNC, and the full moon is square Uranus, which just feels like a wrench in the works and something chaotic and something explosive. I thought Trump was going to fire Vance or do this is
Mm.
also under a Mercury retrograde, right? That's ruling a lot of the other stuff that we're talking about. I thought it was going to be some like chaotic situation where he was going to throw some sort of tantrum or something to try to like pull focus, or something else was going to try to pull focus. But that chaotic, explosive, startling, we could say innovative breakthrough kind of energy of the full moon seemed to be the feeling of the DNC. And I'm not saying I feel like the DNC is an innovative place to go, or that the situation is something that is, even feels positive to me personally. I'm just saying that the vibe check of that whole situation was just pure exhilaration and excitement. And so the chaos also worked for the moment.
It did. It was like, I mean, I feel like when you were saying Trump may have thrown a tantrum, I
Yeah.
feel like he did, but nobody listened. Like it
Yeah.
almost got drowned out. And, because he's like still stuck on it was unfair to Biden. And, he's kind of
Well,
whining in the background.
he
And
keeps
then
saying that he's prettier than her.
has he said that? That's
Yeah.
so
He's like,
wild.
she's not that attractive. I'm way more attractive than she is. I mean, that's
It's
his
lunacy.
narcissism, like at it. Yeah.
But
Anyways.
I feel like his attacks used to be like kind of like, ooh, like you would kind of flinch like that hurt. But now
Yeah.
they just feel so like it's like they're like misses. Um
Yeah.
and like a
They're
swing and a miss.
tinny.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I really feel like that the full moon, like it amplified the sort of air sign vibes, like in a way, probably. Just like kind of all heady up here. We'll think about the practicalities later. And then, but right now, like that full moon having that sort of spotlight moment, I mean, you kind of want a spotlight
Mm-hmm.
in terms
Mm-hmm.
of the narrative
Mm-hmm.
and the news and the media. And I
Mm-hmm.
feel like that's what
Mm-hmm.
was happening.
Yeah. And the last full moon, Biden dropped out. So the Democrats stole the show. That full moon, they stole the thunder from the Republican DNC, blah, 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 the aftermath or whatever. And then this one, they really just like fully went for it. Okay. So that's like the little lay of the land. And then by Thursday, we have the Venus square Mars, which is also really tough. So we're just going to like backtrack a little bit and talk about these like little sections of astrology that are all connected. That's like the big kind of stage setting of what was happening. But we thought we'd go through like how things looked to be kind of parsed out and the other things that happened. So we want to remember like Mercury has been retrograde from August 4th to August 28th. It will be retrograde till August 28th. And so it was ruling both Mars and Jupiter. It is ruling both Mars and Jupiter while they are in Gemini. And so some of the funnier things maybe that happen is that Trump's email gets hacked on the 10th of August, which just feels so like a Mercury retrograding him. um, and then we have, oh yeah, we have Elon Musk and Trump doing this like incredibly bizarre live talk on formerly known as TikTok or formerly known as Twitter. And there's like a weird glitchy start. So it's very like Mercury retrograde. It's like a 2-hour ramble. Also, Trump has some weird lisp that like no one really like picked. I mean, it got picked up a little bit, but like the way he was speaking was like strange and different from what we're normally like used to hearing about him. There's a lot of like the, of course, like throughout this whole time period, there's a lot of fraying and fracturing, especially on the left, in terms of the DNC, in terms of who's the candidate, in terms of what this administration is actively participating in still after 10 months of a genocide in Palestine. And so there's a lot of like fracturing, it seems like, on the left, even kind of more so in this like beginning part of August. So in terms of like glitchy Mercury retrograde stuff, those were a couple of the pieces that we like picked up on. In terms of like personal situations, I told everyone forever, like, make sure you get ahead on your work. Don't leave it all till August because August will feel crunchy and awful. And Mercury is retrograde because the Mars Saturn makes things tight, right? It gives you like that time constraint. Like we said, like the Democratic Party has this time constraint on who it wants to get elected. And so that's like a mega kind of example of what might be happening in our lives. And so, of course, like I get COVID. Mars, Saturn, hard aspects are also very connected to COVID since we've had it. Like the spikes seem to happen around the conjunctions, the squares, and the oppositions. And so, of course, like LA and I think New York, I think other parts of obviously the world, but I think LA was like a real hot spot. Like everybody we knew had COVID. I got it. I had it. It wasn't awful, but it was awful. COVID's always awful. It's isolating. It's like
Yeah.
demoralizing. It's depressing. I feel like it takes all of your serotonin. You're just like, oh my God, this will never end. I can't be around anybody. Like it's so lonely. And then it went away for me. And then 7 days later, it came back. I just got my COVID just like returned. I had a rebound. And so again, I was like in and out of these like isolation moments. I was in and out of being able to do work. Like I got so far behind. So like everything that I told everybody else to make sure they do, I'm glad that I did some of it for myself because I did get behind, but thank God I had gotten ahead so that when the astrology hit,
Yeah.
I wasn't so behind. But did it land for you in any kind of way that
Um,
was
it
that you
did.
want to share?
I'll share that I got COVID on my birthday, which is the last day of
Oh,
July.
Thea.
And but honestly, like it felt that like what you said, like wanting to move forward, but like just not being able to. And like having this, I could feel the kind of like wheels turning in me, and I really wanted to get stuff done, but it's just like, I mean, the body will only do what it does. And it was really like in so many different ways, like get lost in the woods kind of energy. Like with the retrograde, you're not really going to move forward. You're not going to make progress. Good luck if you tried to like make a plan because all my
Yeah.
plans came undid. And it
Yeah.
was just, I mean, looking at this astrology, like when we did like our 2024 year, we're like this part,
Yeah.
this part. So it's just, when you had a very astrology good, pl- like the way it
Yeah.
played out,
The plan.
real life
Yeah.
bad.
Yeah. Not good feeling,
Yeah.
um, but it was weird to have that experience. And so many people around me got sick, not just with COVID, but with other weird stomach viruses. And so much hard stuff happened. Like you and I both know a couple of people who, like out of the blue, lost folks. Like it was just like it's been a really hard time personally, and have that juxtaposition with the world, with not the world, but like the country we live in, the people that we might at some point feel aligned with or in some ways feel aligned with, celebrating and having this like huge high, like this enthusiasm in the media and just like the
Mhm.
spinny headiness, as you said before. So like personally it was like a really heavy hard time, and then you're watching like all of this stuff go on the outside that
Well,
also
there's our
feels just so
Saturn.
weird. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that Saturn and Pisces to me has been so much like, I feel like it kind of got, like, sort of s activated with the Mars square,
Hmm.
and it really did feel like just, like, deep grief,
Yeah.
forgiveness, compassion,
Mm.
surrender, like, all these things of, like, what are you gonna do when the tidal wave goes like this? And it almost, you know I really kind of I don't know if this is good or bad, but fell back on the need to compartmentalize, which I think is what an air sign like benefics Jupiter and air sign will do is kind of like, okay, well, like, what do we think about it? What can we like, what does it mean? And but not being able to get the sort of whereas if Jupiter were in Pisces, get the kind of balm and the sort of medicine to for that moment. And so it did feel like hard in so many people's lives as well that I knew. And almost like if we can't move forward with what we want, maybe the best thing is just to Saturn wants us to just like be here with it
Yeah.
amidst the
Yeah. And
tornado of all this
yeah.
that's going on.
Yeah. And I think that's so important for a lot of what we're going to talk about. But I also like the DNC, I was watching it and I was like, there's no way this isn't a super spreader in some way. Like There's no
Yeah.
way. Like, so the Mars Saturn also is showing up like that. I mean, I'm not saying that COVID is an astrological phenomenon. I'm just saying that, these spikes, these situations do look like they
A
connect
lot
in a
of
lot of
people in
ways.
the United Center. That's what it looks like to
Yes,
me.
yes, 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 yes. Okay, so Mercury's ruling this stuff, and then we can kind of move towards the Mars. Well, then there's right before we get to the full moon, there's the Mars Jupiter conjunction. And one of the things that we didn't talk about, and neither one of us, I don't think, feel like super well versed on this, but I just want to say that Bangladeshi's Gen Z revolution that seemed to topple um, Hasina is something that like it started happening in the beginning of August, and so the prime minister resigned and fled Bangladesh after weeks of violent protests led by mostly young students, marking the end of a 15-year rule, which was criticized for its authoritarian tendencies. I'm reading off of a CNN blog post. But we talked about this and we thought there's a striking similarity to the Jupiter Uranus conjunction that happened in April when the student uprisings here and also around the world happened regarding Palestine and investments and wanting to divest from Israel. And so I feel like there's a similarity between Mars and Uranus in some ways. They move very differently and they're very different planets, but there is like a real sharpness to both of them. And so I thought it was fascinating that as Mars was coming up to Jupiter, that there was another kind of like student uprising. And because Jupiter has to do with teachers, wisdom, students, learning, and like the development of one's mind, that it was another kind of like student protest and another big Jupiter type of moment in the year.
Yeah, I mean, that is striking, the student component of it. Like, if a revolution or protest is led by students and to have that Jupiterian signature about, like, I mean, I think of Jupiter, like you were saying, as the sage, the teacher, but it's got that academia kind of in its domain. And that, like, if I think it's interesting that this happened when Mars and Jupiter came together, because like, you could say that the Mars-Uranus, like, is the spark, but then the Mars Jupiter like moves it to action, does something. Um, and I feel like when I'm not well versed in this, but it feels like it had like a moment where it completed and like overthrew
Mm-hmm.
in that way
Right,
that
right, right, right.
like
And Mars is a
accomplished
faster
something.
moving planet, so like the transit's complete within the month, whereas like a Jupiter Uranus is like a little slower. It's still complete within a certain time frame, but it's like a bigger, longer kind of rippling out, I think, than with a
Like a
Mars
long
Jupiter.
haul kind of thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
can be. And then in terms of like the Mars Saturn, when we were talking about the COVID kind of uptick and us both getting COVID and everybody we know getting sick, there was also, unfortunately, another monkeypox outbreak. Um, and that happened as Mars is coming up to square Saturn, and the last monkeypox outbreak was during Mars Saturn in fixed signs. So it was still Mars Saturn in these contentious kind of positions. So that's just like a little context for the Mars Saturn. We do look out for health stuff at that time because obviously if you don't have health, everything else is impossible, if not just like incredibly hard. So when you're looking at the year in terms of like how the astrology might roll out, I do always think those Mars Saturn moments are like especially uh, kind of where we are susceptible to things that will slow us down. And I think a lot of times since COVID, that's been these kind of outbreaks of things that are horrific. Um, okay, so as Mars and Jupiter are coming together, making a square to Saturn, then we move into the beginning of the DNC, we move into that full moon in Aquarius that has a Mercury cazimi in it. So Mercury and the sun come together on the Sunday right before the DNC starts. And that's also square Uranus. I thought that's when I thought the news, something was going to break. And it didn't really. But what I think it did was it described, which is what we said last time. We were like, maybe we're wrong about all this, and it could just be describing the event. So if Mercury is making a cazimi, it's like giving us some kind of insight into something, and it's square Uranus, then it's speaking about something that is unprecedented or unconventional, or something that's exciting or groundbreaking or going to make a lot of noise. And then we had the full moon the next day on the beginning of it. And as you pointed out, the full moon is at
Exactly on it's on 27 Aquarius and exactly on top of the US's natal moon
right.
at Aquarius.
Right. So it's like a return to this country's natal lunar placement. And if you were going to talk about the moon in a country's chart, what would you say about it? That it
I'd say,
represents?
well, I think it represents like how the country is, like what's fundamental to it, what it cares about. Um, it's col- in Aquarius, it's like the sort of collective care. The ideals, this country is founded on so many ideals, going back to like Greco-Roman philosophy and what it means to be a republic or democracy, or et cetera. And I feel like the care about what we believe in was like really center stage at the DNC. It was like, what do we believe in? We're Americans. I felt like a lot of the DNC rhetoric was really that 27-degree, like full moon Aquarius, like, what do we like? We're Americans. This is what America looks like. They had like different, it was very like America is a melting pot energy, like is very
Yeah.
90s to me in some
Right,
way.
right, 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 right.
Right?
Yeah.
Like everybody gets on stage and
Yeah.
it could
I'd
go.
also say that the moon represents the people of the country,
Mm,
right? Like the
yes.
the the
The
people,
bodies,
right?
the people
Yeah,
that make
the
it up.
bodies of people. Yeah, exactly. And so that being square Uranus, there is this feeling of like kind of like a new thing. So Uranus is also very like new energy. It's like going to bring something new. And I think that's what people, again, I'm not saying I felt this, but I think that's what I saw people feeling is like there's a new hope, there's a new candidate, there's a new person, there's a new way to do this. Like this is possible. This is also a Black South Asian woman has never been on that stage for that thing. If she wins, someone with her identities has never done that before. So that's the like, I'm not saying it's groundbreaking. I'm saying that within the establishment and the institution, it is.
Yes. Within, like, just look at history.
Yeah.
It's different.
Yeah. It's
And
different.
she she already now,
Yeah.
she already is new and different
Yep.
because she's the first like female vice president that is a Black
Right.
woman and Southeast Asian woman.
Exactly.
So like she
Exactly.
already is kind of Uranian
Yeah.
in that way, like
Yeah.
that signature coming
Yeah.
coming through her.
Yeah. And so the full moon seemed to just describe what we already knew was going to happen. It wasn't
I think
describing something
yeah.
else,
I think
which is,
sometimes as astrologers, we work too hard. We're like, we're gonna
I
find
know.
the thing that pops. It's just like, no, it already is. It's doing.
So we already told you what it is. It's happening. You have the program. Just stick to it. Literally. Okay. So we start with the full moon. It's the United States' full moon. It's very much about the we the people kind of energy. This is like we're bringing everybody in. And then, like, the next significant piece of astrology that happens is on Thursday when Venus squares Mars. Oh, sorry. We've also got
V-
Jupiter square Saturn on that full moon day and Venus opposing Saturn on that full moon
yes,
day.
those two things. Yes,
All of it. So we
not
see
Monday.
that Monday. So we see the Jupiter square Saturn is relating back to whatever happened in 2020, December of 2020, which is when Kamala Harris and Joe Biden won and she became the vice president. She didn't enter the office until like a couple weeks later. But this moment is the opening square, the opening energizing square to that moment when they did defeat Trump and they did get in office. And then here she is boosted up to the big seat on the day that those planets that are so slow, it took 4 years for them to form a square with each other. on the day that they make that square. So it's just like this perfect story arc. It's a perfect chapter to chapter. Then she's the Venus of the situation because she's a woman. And the Venus is opposing Saturn, which is, the structure of things. It's a tough transit, but she does really well in tough astrology, I think.
I agree. I mean, she did seem to embody that Venus in Virgo in its
Yeah.
fall, like
Mhm.
beige suits. I even saw like news headlines that were like, we're not going to make it about the way that she dresses, right? It's going to
But
be
they
like,
did. The New York Times still did. They did.
but it was very practical. It's very like
Yeah.
sand, neutral,
Yeah.
dark. Um,
We
I
love a
didn't see
Venus
any
in
red.
Virgo. We
I
didn't no red. No red.
no
No
red.
red. It was
Um,
practical. It was there to work. But her whole thing is let's get to work. And the
yeah,
Venus opposing Saturn and Venus in Virgo is like, yeah, we're going to work. We're going to parse it out. We're going to figure out what's wrong. We're going to figure out what's right. We're going to figure it out. We're going to categorize. We're going to da, 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 da. We're going to make it beautiful. And we're going to, get people together through the hard work. So those things all happened. And then throughout the week, Mars and Venus are lining up to make a square, which is really can be very tough on women, on femmes, on queer folks, on gender issues, if you will, under patriarchy. So anybody whose gender is marginalized under patriarchy can tend to have, those issues will be parsed out, like what violence occurs under patriarchy. That's how I see like a Mars Venus kind of setup. I'm always looking like, okay, what are the stories going to be? So we have a lot of stories that really unpack the Mars Venus of it all. I think that we're building up until this point, and it's not like they are finished or they like that's all there is to them. But I do think that the stuff that was happening is like wild because Venus is in its fall in Virgo. So it's already struggling a little bit. And then when it comes up against Saturn and then it squares Mars, it's just in this particularly prickly spot where it's vulnerable to attack. And I would say Mars energy is to attack, and Saturn energy is like to corner or to make real, to make it kind of substantial. So we thought she would have a really hard time because she has the same Venus as what was happening in the sky. And that situation was there. But again, she did well with it. And she also has a Mars Saturn opposition in her chart. So she has a real tough signature in her chart and she works it. She's made it work for her. Was a prosecutor, like all her jobs are like tough jobs. Um, and now she's up for the toughest job in this context that there is, right? The most powerful person in the free world, as they say, that's a pretty tough job to go for. So part of the way we saw the Venus square Mars kind of like rolling out, I'm going to leave the DNC for a second and look at the
mhm,
other pieces that were going on. So one of the funniest things I think happened is that as Venus literally transited from ruckus, performative, big haired Leo into very hardworking, proper, thoughtful, mindful, demure Virgo. We literally we went from brat girl summer to demure in like a second. And it was so stunning to watch the internet like just articulate that in such a kind of like dramatic way. So
so
the
amazing.
the creator Jules LeBron um, came out with this whole thing about being demure, and obviously you know what we're talking about because it was even in the New York Times. Um, and then we're looking at like women, queer folks, again, femmes, like what are the issues that are coming up around gender or like men, women, that kind of like, up against the patriarchy kind of vibe. We've got Taylor Swift telling Don to go basically fuck himself after he used an AI image that depicted her as wearing like a MAGA t-shirt. Chapel Roan gets on the internet and tells people to stop being weird and stop being like stalkerish and awful, just because they like her music. And then we've got, of course, the incredible Amane Khalif, the Algerian Olympic gold medalist who won a gold medal for boxing. She files a lawsuit against J.K. Rowling, Elon Musk, and Donald Trump for cyber harassment and perpetuating transphobic online abuse. And this then like shuts JK up for a minute. Apparently she
A
came back
hot
like
minute.
yeah, hot. Not a demure minute.
No. It's been
Um,
great. It's been great.
yeah. Yeah. So and that was just like so epic because obviously that abuse and that whole like line, that whole rhetoric was happening during the Olympics. Um, but that the court case kind of came about more in this and the whole thing kind of like really came to like a kind of like shape during this part of the summer and this part of the astrology. Did you see anything else?
I think maybe we're gonna get to Blake Lively. It ends
Yeah.
with us.
Yeah, and,
Yeah.
so the Blake Lively of it kind of aside, there's this obviously you all know, but if you unless you've been hiding under a rock, there's the It Ends With Us press tour, which goes really badly. But the thing that I want to point out is this is a movie about intimate partner violence. And intimate partner violence, of course, is something that we could relate to a Venus Mars square, right? Like it seems like the most like textbooky kind of way to delineate it in the worst way if you took it and made the kind of worst case scenario out of it. And so what happens is the press tour is not good and it goes really sideways and we'll see what happens with it. But the the focus I wish would have been on what intimate partner violence actually is and how systemic of an issue it is and how it's not an interpersonal issue. It's a communal issue. It's a structural issue. It is an issue that exists because we live in patriarchy and white supremacy and all the other things. And, some of the discourse went there and some of it has happened, but it like could have been this really powerful moment of if actual survivors had been working on that film and been working on that press tour and been working on how the media was engaging the conversation, it could have been a really important moment in terms of like highlighting what is a a what is everywhere. One in four women will experience severe domestic violence, and 1 in 2 trans folks will. So it's like it's everywhere. We all know folks. Obviously at the company, my wife, Sonia Passy, runs Chani, the company, the app, and the whole company, and also has a organization called Free From, which if you're interested in, you should go check out. The interesting thing is she's putting out a documentary in the fall that is made by survivors, made by a team of survivors, the people behind the camera, and then it's made about survivors. And so if anybody's interested, you can go to freefrom.org to learn more about that. I think it's also, they have their own website made, survivormade.com or .org. We'll have to check that, but we'll put it in the notes. Did you want to say anything about any of those?
I think it showed the risk of being flippant in a
Mm-hmm.
moment where see, like, this is the risk too of, like, Mars and Gemini, um, being like, everything is just a hot take. And when it comes down to it, that Venus and Virgo, that square to Mars and Gemini, it was just like, actually, it could cause a lot of damage to treat this like it's just another party and you can sit with your legs folded behind you on the couch and like sort of I mean, even her co-star where was like, "Oh my god, like how is she answering this question?" It's so um it's bizarre. It came off across as bizarre and I really if I think about planets and their detriment, like so a planet and its exaltation is the opposite and of what we have now. And exaltation, right, is that like raised up, revered celebrity status. And I think a Venus and Virgo in that with this tough spot to the malefic planets like we've been talking about is really like you get dragged. Like
Mhm.
you might get canceled, called out. You might
A
and feel like
lawsuit.
you might get a lawsuit. You
Named
might
in a lawsuit. JK.
yes, all of those things. Felt really just like, oh, the kind of shame, like the shame that could come from not like I think the gift of a Venus and Virgo is that you're like it's gonna work, right? Like it's
Mhm.
gonna work for for like you were saying, gender issues, women issues, like trans issues. It's gonna like do
Mhm.
some sort of um effort
Mhm.
to
Heavy
not just like
lifting.
expect us to all come together and it to be fun.
Right.
And then when that's not done in the tough spots against the planet of conflict and
Mhm.
opposition, you
Mhm.
might get all of those things that I named, like
Mhm.
sort of drug through,
Mhm.
the ringer kind of speak.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
yeah, all of that happening together was just really wild.
Yeah, and then there was another um, situation that Crystal Kaiser got 11 years in prison for killing her abuser. And so Crystal Kaiser was a teenager. She's Black. She was convicted of killing Randall Volar, a 34-year-old white man who has sexually abused and trafficked her starting when she was 16. So in this case, right, this has been going on for a while. So in a landmark 2022 ruling, the Wisconsin Supreme Court allowed Kaiser to argue that her crime was justified because she was a trafficking victim. However, facing the risk of a lengthy and public trial, she accepted a plea deal resulting in an 11-year prison sentence. So I'm reading transcripts here. Um, so this pulls focus on what happens when you are the Venus and Virgo, I think, in a society, when you're marginalized in multiple ways, when you're a woman, when you're Black, when you're poor, when you're in a situation where people are abusing you, taking advantage of you, and then you do something to try to, get out of the situation, or you do what is at your disposal to do, and then getting 11 years for it just really feels like that Venus Saturn, that the carceral kind of punishment, and the Venus Mars of it all just being about the violence inflicted on her young being, and then her again doing what is open to her to do to try to get out of it, and her being then punished for it, and kind of like that other side of like this is the thing, and to juxtapose what happens with the It Ends With Us press tour with what happens with an actual human being's life, like those both of those things. The movie is about gender-based violence, it's about intimate partner violence. The real life situation is the reality of gender-based violence. It is the reality of what happens when all of this violence goes unchecked on both the interpersonal level, the communal level, the structural level, societal level, nation-based, kind of level of it. So I'm not sure if something else will be done for her case or if it can be appealed or whatnot, but that was also one of those like moments of articulation that's so devastating to see that kind of ruling come out in that situation. But it was also so much like that, the worst case scenario of what that kind of architecture, astrologically speaking, kind of points to.
Yeah, I mean, I feel that the Venus Saturn in there specifically, that punishment element that you're speaking to, and then the unfairness and like lack of total justice, like that really it felt like I could see like Venus in its fall ruling the South Node in Libra and just not being able like the kind of like just justice is not even being served in this way. Um, and but also pointing to, like, so what do we need to do? Like, I don't know. That's kind of how I felt. Like, I was like, I wish I knew, like, what could change? What could
Yeah.
change this?
Right.
Uh,
Like, what do we do about
yeah,
that?
what do we do? Um, yeah.
Yeah. Yes. As a company, we do things like we give 5% of our revenue in cash grants to folks that are in need of emergency funds. And we work with survivors in terms of like developing businesses and selling, being a funnel to sell things that will help people stay safe, right? Because we know that money is so important in a capitalist system, and it's such a tool to help folks stay safe. So it's like a huge piece of what we try to do, kind of just on like an everyday, ongoing level, because the reality of what people live with and try to survive is not like lost on us. So these two like stories kind of really bookend the situation, that setup, and that topic in a kind of like, I don't know. It's a hard thing to grapple with, because on one end you've got like Hollywood kind of like,
Mhm.
well, what if we just
Mhm.
like made a movie and like there's no cost to seemingly to anybody, and then on the other end somebody's paying with their life in kind of multiple ways because of the systems we live within and because
Mhm.
the violence goes so unchecked. And then we get to the last night of the DNC, where that is, Kamala Harris is giving her speech, and she's giving it as Venus and Mars are making that square. Like it's happening in real time. And again, I thought like, okay, well, what does this mean? Like, what does it mean to go to be the person doing the thing and enacting the thing? And what I was left with, so one of the things I've been talking about all year is like, I felt like as of June, the year changed. As soon as Jupiter moved into Gemini, we were in a different story. And then I was like, and then Mars moves into Gemini and it feels like a revving up of that different story. And so we literally get the changeover of the guard. And in this, so there's that feeling of like, okay, we're in a totally different story now. We're in a different chapter. And in the moment, and so I also talked about Jupiter being in Gemini, being in its detriment, or in its exile, being a time where it was hard to feel hope and faith. And then this past couple of weeks, I've been like, I was so dead wrong. Like everyone is like, faith, my hope is returned. The return, I think even Obama was like, there's a
Hope.
return for,
Yeah.
yeah,
Very nostalgic, yeah.
yeah, very like throwback, and like all of this stuff that I was like, wow, no, people do not feel like, people really feel like galvanized and they feel hopeful now. So like, I was so wrong in my read of that. And then the speech on Thursday happened. And there's a million different takes on this. And there's a million different reasons why people are excited about this moment and excited about her. And far be it from me to deny the power of Black women organizing in this country for change. Like, far be it from me to say that, I'm not saying, I think voting is very powerful, and I will work tirelessly to up and down the ballot get, hopefully non-APAC funded Democrats in. I don't know if that's how possible that is, but that's like my mission. But listening to the speech, when she gets to the point about Israel, was, and sorry, let me backtrack. The thing that's happening at the DNC the whole week is that not one Palestinian delegate has been invited to or is allowed to speak on the stage. But we have Republicans, we have people that have very different views than what the Democratic Party seems to uphold on stage, because the whole thing is that the tent is really big, except if you're Palestinian. And so all week it was like, can we pressure the party enough to change that? And I'm not saying that that's, that's going to do, I mean, what we need is an arms embargo and a ceasefire. That's it. That's not like a prop on a stage. I don't want to, I'm not trying to say that like symbolically that's, going to fix anything. But that piece was wild. I'm going to stop there. Do you want to say anything about?
But see, Chani, this is where I think you are right about Jupiter and Gemini not really giving real faith, like not like a real, like, uh, like that it would be hard to find our faith or things to believe in, and that we may feel demoralized. Like, I think that did happen, but it was weird because there was a sensational hope rhetoric performance, and you and I talked about as we're watching and waiting, is it gonna happen? Is, like, a Palestinian delegate gonna be allowed to take the stage to speak? Is this tent big enough? As Ta-Nehisi Coates, like, wrote in his piece, I think the day before the last day of the DNC, and it was kind of like a letdown. Like, I did feel deflated because it was such a fucking opportunity. It makes me so mad because the DNC has done this so many times. It's like it either tries to play it safe or not be attacked, and it's so fear-based, when in reality, if what it means to have a big tent is that you invite people on stage to make their point, to, like, be a big tent. If you're gonna have people who like used to be Republicans and now they switched and like all this kind of stuff. It's like, what does it mean to be the party of like, we're the good people here? This is what the
Yeah.
Democrats do,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
like nobody's putting this, and if I could, I'm going to take a long windy path to answer your
Go.
question so you can cut me
Go.
off.
Go.
Okay. So like so
I'm with
I
you.
and I think you are right that the rhetoric of hope and energy and being galvanized when shit is still fucked up is really duplicitous. It's like two-headed. It's Jupiter and Gemini saying one thing here and doing another thing. And I think that disappointment that is really, I mean, I can feel it in my body. It feels so like such a fucking letdown. And you know, I think that like I think so much, but I think that the reason I thought a lot about this. I was like, why does nobody bring this to like the RNC, right? Why does it come to
Mm,
the DNC?
mm,
And it's like
mm, mm.
because the Dems own that, like, we are for children,
Mm-hmm.
right? We're for
Mm-hmm.
safety. We're for
Mm-hmm.
body autonomy.
Women.
Women, but do we see what's going
Which
on?
women?
Yes, which women? And so all these things, it's like I think that fractalization, like this fracture
Mm-hmm.
that you were
Mm-hmm.
speaking to early in the episode, is really being shown here. And
Mm-hmm.
I wonder
Mm-hmm.
what the impact is going to be when, because like what happens is like enthusiasm from like the rally kind of dies down a little bit. And then we're left with, oh shit, like actually, like there's no path forward. This situation could be the same as if Biden were here, but we have a different figurehead. And the US is gonna continue a policy that, I mean, like, her language was very like, they didn't do anything, right? Like, I'm used to this is what politicians do, but it didn't take action, it didn't assert, it just spoke about our current reality, really. And so there was nothing that really, if you're gonna have hope, that, like, actually said what was going to be different or what was going to change. And I think she still has that opportunity, but it's a missed opportunity not to do it at the DNC.
And well, it's how like doing the two things at once. It's like you're arming Israel and saying there needs to be a ceasefire. So if they didn't have fire, it'd be easier to cease, A of all. But also, it was so, the Mars of it all was so present because she talked about having like the strongest military in the world, or I don't,
Lethal.
the most
Yeah.
lethal. That's so Mars. And then also that two things very different. Israel's a right to defend itself, and the US will always make sure it can, means we're sending arms. And Palestinians should have sovereignty. Palestinians don't even have an army. How are they going to have sovereignty if you're arming their genociders? So you're just like, and
Yeah.
when she said that, it was so like, it's like, okay, fine. So of course you're not going to let a Palestinian speak. This is, you're showing who the party is, but you're lying about it. And fine, you're a politician. These are politics. This is an empire we're talking about. I'm not an idiot. Like, I get it. Everybody only cares about money and land grabs and having access to the Middle East. And that's all this, I think, is ever about. It's not about Jews. It's not about, it's just about like access. But the people, and people need to have enthusiasm. They need to have hope. I get it. I get it. But I just wish that people didn't walk past Palestinian or organizers and activists that were outside saying the names of murdered children, that people at the DNC didn't walk by them and laugh or cover their ears or go la 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 la, like
Yeah, I
so many
saw
people were
that.
filmed doing. It's like, can you not hold both? You can have your
Mm,
excitement. I don't want Trump to be in office either. I don't. I know a lot of people say they're the same and they're just as bad. And there's a lot of, we can have a million conversations for 7,000 years. But the fact is, I don't want him in office. I'm terrified of him being in office. I'm going to do whatever I can to make sure we block him. That's my vow. But can we not hold multiple things as true at
mm,
once? Please do not block a reality out just to experience something that you feel you need to experience. The things that we were all protesting about a couple months ago are happening, but worse. It's gotten worse.
it's gotten worse.
It's gotten worse. More has happened. More time has gone. Why weren't there more people at the protests there? Why wasn't it bigger? Like maybe that's the Saturn kind of tamping it all down.
Yeah, so can I talk about
Yeah,
that? Because I
please.
was really hoping that, like, it would just be, like, protests, shutting it down,
Yeah,
blocking things off, and it
yeah.
really, like, as I watched, it was, like, not
Wah,
that.
wah. Yeah.
Yeah, and because I have been tracking, like, in previous episodes I've said since, like, like, in
Hmm.
1968. So I, like, sat with this weekend, I was like,
Yeah.
"Where was I wrong? Where did it not happen?" And I think at the Saturn, yes, like, Saturn being like, "Okay, we're gonna kind of" the sensation that happened was very institutional, right? It was very, like,
Very.
leaders elected. It wasn't on the outside. It wasn't people trying like something completely new or protesters getting center stage or going viral that I was kind of hoping for. I think
Hmm.
it really um but I still think that there's a seed planted
Yeah,
here
I do too.
and that makes me hopeful
Makes me hopeful and wary because
and wary. Yes, of course.
the uncommitted movement is 700,000 people. I don't know why you don't think you need those votes.
Yes, and the DNC is in Chicago, and so I had took screenshots from Ta-Nehisi codes. The host for the DNC is Chicago, whose metro area is home to more Palestinian Americans than anywhere else in the country. But you would not know this looking at the stage. Despite the appeals of Palestinian American delegates and activists, no Palestinian American is scheduled to address the convention for the main stage. I just love his clarity. It's just like
Yeah.
the incongruence of like where
Yeah.
you are in space and time, but like what
Yeah.
you've chosen to present.
Yeah.
Um,
I
and
do
so
think it's going to hurt them. I do think
yes.
it was just the worst decision. I do think it was abysmal, and I do think it is something that is going to the fracture lines. I mean, they're already there. I'm not saying that anything new, and again, I'm not saying that somebody put on stage was going to solve anything, but it was just like the most blatant display of no, you don't matter here.
Mhm.
Was like after everything, but you're going to talk about Palestinian sovereignty? Like what?
Mm. the emptiness of rhetoric in this moment is very, very loud to me. And then also too, like, if you're trying, like, it's been proven, like, that we know these are students, this is Gen Z, these are new voters, this is the issue. And it to, like, rely on memes in the beginning, that, like, those things don't, I think you've kind of shown your cards, or, like, what you're actually going to do in this moment, like, when it came down to it, like, despite appeals to, despite, like, even it also felt like, okay, we're gonna vet them, it almost like, kind of like stringing someone along, like, I
Yeah,
felt a little bit strung
fully,
along,
fully.
and that, I think, is, like, the kind of, like, sad, like, sour taste in my mouth from the
Yeah,
event.
yeah.
Um,
But is it good? Because it also just makes it very blatant. It's like there's no, this is what it is. This is what it is. This
yeah.
is the country
This
we're
is what
living
it
in,
is
and
in
this
our
is what
two-party
the,
system.
yeah,
So then we go back to the whole thing.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And again, I am pushing for as many Democratic nomination, seat, all the things. So I'm not disengaging. I don't want to be a nihilist in this moment, but I just want to also say, like, if we can be so deeply disappointed and so deeply gutted by the actions that people take and still be committed to doing everything we can to push for the world that we want and for the ways in which we want the people that call themselves leaders to govern. And it all feels impossible in moments like that, where
Mm.
it seems like, how can you just shut your own delegates out? Like, and you're right. Like you say, like, the history, like, Black folks weren't allowed to speak. Like,
Mhm,
who was
mhm.
let in? Okay, so now you center some people, but then it's like there's always this siphoning off of, like, who is a human and who is not
Mm.
in these systems.
You know what I realized,
Mm.
and it's bringing out from, I think that the Uranus is, well, we've known this, Uranus is, like, on the fixed star
Mm.
algal, and it feels like it's
Mm.
really, so Uranus is, like,
Mm.
around 27, I think,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
fixed stars around 26 right now
Yeah.
in the zodiac of Taurus, and it's really, like, within a degree, and it feels like it's bringing up the kind of, like, monstrous kind of, like, um rage in some part, and at first I was mapping that, like, this, because Uranus is online with the full moon that was there of Tor in terms of, like, it almost felt like Kamala being, like, holding up Algol is the fixed star that symbolizes Medusa's head. So Perseus, holds up Medusa's head, it's like the snake, she's the Gorgon, but it felt like, okay, that we're gonna be anti-Trump, and, like, that's what she kept making it about, that's what the whole DNC was making it about, we have to defeat Trump, and it felt like we're gonna hold up his head. I mean, there's been a lot of algol things going on, even going
Yeah.
back to,
Yeah.
the ear thing, but
Mhm.
I think that,
The
like,
ear thing.
the
The ear
assassination
thing
attempt.
happened when Mars and Uranus were on Algo. Yeah.
Oh, yes, yeah.
The ear thing.
The ear thing. So, um, but I think I was feeling very much the other part of algol is, like, that sort of sacred rage.
Mhm.
That really is, like, uh, felt very loud in this way, in all
Mhm.
the ways that we're talking about shutting people out.
Yeah.
Um,
And if you wanna go into that myth, like, that myth is a very patriarchal version of the victim being betrayed by a
yes.
gatekeeper, and there's violence inflicted upon the goddess, and she's beheaded, and, um, because she's the one that is a woman, it's just like she gets sacrificed, and
Yeah.
so it's that rage of being sacrificed in that way. Yeah. Yeah. So that's how it rolled out. And we're gonna, see how, that's how one person in a very powerful situation, position, dealt with very challenging astrology, both for everybody, but also in her own chart. And I also am very aware of the system we live within and the country we live within. And my job is just to keep doing what I can with what we've got to make sure that we can be safe as possible. And, I think we all have to come to those things on our own. So whatever you decide, it's still August. We all have, our own process around this. I just really want us to respect everybody's way of sorting through these different realities and how they're all kind of come crashing in together. Like it's everyone wants to make it such a simplistic issue, and it's not. We're in very like devastating, complex times, and each one of us has to really think very deeply about what is the strategy long term for me and us, you know, in all the different ripple effects of how we're connected to other people. So I just want to honor everybody's like feelings around it. If you were loving it and enthusiastic and you're angry at Thea and I for saying anything about, like, I don't know, like whatever your reaction to this is, if you hate us because you think we're too centrist, great. I mean, it's like you're allowed to have your feelings. And I just think we need to have really big, spacious containers at this moment for everything that comes up, because it is all legitimate. And the more we push each other into like the margins and say like that point of view doesn't work and that feeling is ridiculous because of ABC, it's just like the more and more fractured we get. And I'd actually just like us to like expand the container a little bit and say a whole bunch of things can be true at once. And we're not going into the voting booth today. So what can we do to put pressure on the people that have power in this moment to do the things that are morally right, also legally correct? Like if the US, as Peter Beinart pointed out in a New York Times article recently, just followed their own goddamn laws, there would be an arms embargo. Because actually, what we're doing by our own definition, and I'm talking about Jupiter and its detriment, is not legal. So we're not even following our own philosophy, our own law, our own logic in this situation. So,
That was
shall we
perfect.
should we talk about upcoming astrology?
I know. It feels like we have not a lot of time, but also I'm like, oh my gosh, every week there's like,
I
even
know
just
some
with, we got
major.
to ready ourselves for the
Ugh,
debate,
yeah,
but
yeah, yeah. Okay, so big news that's coming up when we look at September is that, I mean, there is that one nice thing that's happening, that Venus is coming into Libra this
yeah,
week as we're
I'm
recording. So
putting everything on August 29th.
yeah, everything's got to work out after August 29th for like 4 weeks or something. It's all got to happen in that little tiny time frame. Okay, so the first major thing that we want to take note of is that basically, like, we're in eclipse season already. Probably, like, we could say when the new moon in Virgo lands, that's when we're really kind of like moving into it, because the new moon in Virgo will turn into a full moon in Pisces, which will be our first eclipse in Pisces near the North Node in a, you know, 2019 years ish, couple decades. So it's a beginning of a whole new chapter, a whole new situation. This is totally different. We've been having eclipses in Aries, which has been really challenging for leaders. And now we're moving into eclipses in Pisces. We'll still have one more eclipse in Aries in the next year, but for now, this is a new chapter. So anybody with like, I don't know, mutable rising signs will experience this eclipse. So we're talking Gemini rising. Obviously, Kamala Harris is Gemini rising. Virgo rising, Sag rising, Pisces rising. These rising signs, this eclipse is a big deal. Different for all four, but big deal because it's going to be in what we call an angular house. So we've got this eclipse happening on the 17th of September. It's happening in Kamala Harris's 10th house of career and public life and reputation. What would you say to that if you saw that in a client's chart, the first eclipse of its kind happening in somebody's 10th house?
I feel like, okay, so if nothing's happened yet, some major stuff is about to happen, and the way that you're perceived in the world, your reputation, how people like whatever you're doing that's in the public, like has this kind of like spotlight, but it's eclipse. So it feels like it's going to usher in a bunch of change. It's got like sort of a grand reveal behind it. It may be like kind of unclear at first because this like eclipses have that kind of smoky effect of like, is that real? Did that happen? But it does initiate this period of change. And on the North Node, I like it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know,
It's an
because it's
increase.
activating that, yeah, it's an increase. It's activating that sort of hunger.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and in the 10th house where people can see, I think it's just gonna be if you wanted to become president, it feels like it aligns.
Yeah. It is conjunct Neptune. Like it's in between Saturn and Neptune. It's
Mhm,
closer to Neptune. Neptune can be good for fame, can be good for having like a glossy kind of finish.
mhm.
It can also make things illegible, confusing, hard to understand. So, for someone who has been criticized for being a little roundabout in communication sometimes, that's what I would say to work on for this eclipse.
Ooh,
Because
that's
this
good
eclipse,
advice.
thank you. This
Kamala, are you
eclipse,
listening to our show?
free Palestine, also practice some of the, no. But I mean, she's not been like that since Mars went into Gemini. She's been like very on point
Yes,
and very strategic, and
practiced.
it's very practiced. So who knows? The debate I know will be very practiced, so it might not have that impact, but it can be windy and like a little confused, but also really good for soft lighting, looking good, looking glamorous, I think.
Mhm.
Um, but yes, having that activation in somebody's 10th house of public roles is like, wow, it's pretty stunning because the debate happens within a week of that eclipse. The debate's on the 10th, supposedly, if
It's
Trump doesn't back out.
yes. Yeah, right? They're, like, wavering on the debate today, I saw. I was like, "Is it
Today?
gonna hap" Well, no, today, like, I saw in the news that, like,
Yeah.
Trump's like, "Well, I didn't wanna do it on ABC," and,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
yeah, so it's on the 10th. That's when also interesting, like, the moon will be in Sag, so it's, like, squaring where the eclipse will
Mm,
happen, so it's kind of
mm,
it's got, like, a wobble on
mm-hmm.
it a little bit, but and squaring Saturn, so
Uh-huh.
I think that's interesting.
The
Um,
debate.
yeah, when it happens on
Yeah.
Tuesday the 10th, if it happens.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So it happens within exactly a week. So that's huge. I'd for sure put the eclipse window a week before and a week after the
Mhm.
eclipse, if not the entire time the sun is moving through that sign. But 2 days before that, Mars squares the nodes on the 15th of September. This gives me pause. Mars squaring the nodes makes me think uh, I don't love that for international warmongers and affairs because last October was when Mars made a conjunction to the South Node. And as Mars has made conjunctions to the nodes and also squares to them, it seems to be a time of like uptick of violence. So I'll just say Mars is going to be in its fall. It's going to be in a compromise situation, which it was last October. It was in Libra, different but similar. And squaring the nodes, I don't know. I don't love that. So I wonder if,
It yeah, it kind of feels like it harkens back to October 7th in that
yeah,
way.
it
Yeah.
does in some way. I'm not saying that, whatever, it's an ongoing horror. So there's that. But that's like a red flag for me. The 17th, the eclipse happening 2 days later is like that eclipse, apart from the Mars square the nodes thing, is like, I don't know. It's like it's dreamy. It's Saturn's there, but it's a very different kind of feeling than we've had so far. So I don't really even know kind of what to make of it. It's like, okay, well, what's the dream? What's the illusion? What's the
Mhm.
reality? What would the work take to get this thing done? What's confusing? And do we just need to sleep a little bit more during this moment and dream and like let that other part of ourselves, that other part of our wisdom or whatever kind of take over, because it's not a linear trajectory. It's eclipses and then an eclipse conjunct Neptune. So it feels a little,
Sloshy.
yeah, definitely does. And then then Venus leaves its power spot of Libra by the 22nd, moves into Scorpio, which is a little like, okay, it gets tougher again in a way, I feel like. And then another moment in September that is like a hot spot for me is the 29th of September, because the Sun and Mercury make a conjunction to the South Node. And that feels like it harkens back to last year. It feels like we're moving towards the next eclipse, which is the last eclipse in Libra, which is an anniversary of October 2023, which feels like we're really circling around this stuff. You know, it's a literal year anniversary. We're coming up to the like eclipse anniversary of it. It just feels like, is this ever going to end? And I do feel like with that astrology and with like the debate and with a new eclipse, like there's, I don't know, it just feels like something is kind of coalescing in that area of, I don't know, global affairs or what have you.
Yeah, and because Pluto will be back in Capricorn, I think it's the only part. Yeah, for that like kind of that same window from
Mm-hmm.
mid-September to
To
mid-November.
November. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's got the feeling, and that's the US's natal Pluto placement
Mm-hmm.
thereabouts, and so
Mm-hmm.
it is like there's a lot going on that feels like it's like the Pluto in Capricorn banking systems,
Mm-hmm.
like imperialism,
Mm-hmm.
power through land, like all those kind of
Mm-hmm.
Capricorn things. It's like feels like the last gasp of that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and
And then the robots take over with Pluto and Aquarius. Just
and
kidding.
listen, they kind of are. Have you tried to Google search lately? I was like, I don't want to know what AI thinks. I just want to find the article.
Let me do analog internet.
I I I- I'm a millennial. It's like what I need.
So I think like not to just keep it all on like presidential candidates, but I do think they'll be having to deal with something maybe a little heftier in September. I don't know, maybe something more will be articulated about international affairs, situations. What do you think?
It feels hefty, but the only thing I did say is I did like the Venus trine Jupiter.
Oh yeah, when is
That
that? Thank
happens
you
on
for
the
the bright spot.
15th. It's
Okay, good.
but it's the same day as Mars square the notes. So, it's not going to fix everything. But
It's on the 14th. Yeah, it goes into the
oh,
15th.
sorry, yeah,
Yeah.
the 14th.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
They're together. Yeah.
I
I'll
don't
take
I
it. No, it's good. It's
Yeah, I'll
good. It's
take
good.
it.
It's good. Venus is in its own sign. It trines
Yeah,
Jupiter. It's great. Maybe that will mitigate. Maybe what we've learned
some mitigation.
from August is that the benefics are quite powerful
Yeah.
and that they can mitigate the more challenging kind of moments, because you're right, Venus is ruling that south node. So maybe something good comes from what has felt like lost chances for peace or negotiation. Do you think
Yeah.
that Venus trine Jupiter will bring some sort of negotiating power or prowess?
I like it because Venus and Libra, like being at the negotiation table, finding a way through peace, trining Jupiter, which it feels like the sort of people who can make those decisions, like international court things, I would kind of look at any kind of decisions that feel like they can be upheld, you know,
Hmm.
enforcement is a different thing, but I think that if we're at the negotiating table, if I wanted a transit, it would be this one.
Yeah.
So,
So in terms of like organizers and people that are trying to like get out the vote and do things,
mm,
this might be like there's some, challenging things in the month, but this is a good kind of bright spot in terms of bringing people together and finding a way to rally around the things that we want to actually like move forward. Like there's some, I wouldn't call this like enthusiastic as much as like easeful and helpful in terms of some kind of justice. At the same time as things might be a little, things are just rough. It's, again, we don't have to make up a new thing. We have a lot of things here, but that there's something that gets assisted in otherwise like kind of signaling, some choppy waters, that the Venus trine Jupiter is like here to help grease the wheel and like make something work. So if you're organizing for the moment, or if you're trying to do something where you're wanting to mobilize people, I do so around this time with also like some honey and some joy and some sweetness, because that's how Venus really gets things done.
I love that.
Is there anything else you would say to anyone trying to do anything to move masses of people with September's astrology? We'll be back in September to like talk about how things are going, so we don't have to like do the whole month. But like, is there any piece of it that you want to
If I
give
had
as like
friends who were
advice?
like, I want to organize and I want to get the word out. Back in the day, it was like phone calling. Now, what do they do? Like texting. Like, this might
Mm-hmm.
be a nice day to get your message out.
Mm-hmm.
With and have it be received well.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Mm-hmm.
that like the cohesion and the organizing
Mm-hmm.
force, and Jupiter
Mm-hmm.
kind of in a Mercury ruled sign, being
Mm-hmm.
able to broadcast it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like sweetness and hope, trying and
Yeah.
getting that message out. But again, it's almost eclipsing. So I don't know. Like,
Well,
it just
but that Jupiter rules the eclipse, and if
so you
Jupiter's in
like it.
relationship with Venus, that's also like helpful. Yes, Mars is irritating something that's
Yes.
related to the eclipses, but how much can Jupiter and Venus help it out, I guess? And is the thing that we need to focus on mid-September with that first eclipse in Pisces, is the thing we need to focus on what the dream is, what the ultimate thing is that we're going towards. And yes, there's a lot of shit in the way, and there's a lot of like realities we've got to contend with, and there's a lot of things that are not that and are very far from that. But what is the dream that we can kind of like have there as like our foreground, background, like this is ultimately where we're going. So how do we keep our spirit up so that we can stay centered in our determination and not get lost in our disappointment or in the reality of what it is? It's like, okay, yes, it is, but how do we move towards the dream? Maybe not ever getting there, but moving towards that ultimate,
I love that.
vision. Because there's a lot of like visioning power with Pisces and
And that's how you get
Neptune.
people to act, kind
Yeah.
of. It's
Yeah,
like that
totally.
it kind of moves people towards something that they can
Mm-hmm.
envision, even if it's
Mm-hmm.
not
Mm-hmm.
a reality right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One of the most famous speeches in the world is "I have a dream." Like
Yeah.
because it's he had MLK Jr. had a Pisces moon. This is an eclipse in Pisces. I mean, that was like the epitome of, obviously he had very radical politics, and he had a lot of other things that he said to people that called them on their stuff and, talked about the system. But that's the thing, of course, that in this world we fixate to, but there is that power of the dream.
Which acknowledges reality, because it
Yeah.
says
It's
the
not
dream's
there.
not here,
Yeah.
but we can move there. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. All right. I guess that's a good place to end.
We did it.
We
We
did
missed you,
it.
Eliza.
Eliza will be back next time. So we'll be back in September to talk about the eclipses unfolding in real time. All right. Thanks for hanging out, Thea.
This is great.
It was great.
Thanks, Chani.
Thanks for venting with me.
Anytime.
Bye.